Welcome back. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of RealClearPolitics, talking now with my old friend Eric Spitz. Eric lives in Southern California. He formerly owned the Orange County Register, co-owned it. He's written for us. He's and in today though, I'm putting him on the spot a little bit. Eric's actually a personal friend of Hunter Biden's. Known him since college days?
Since the first day of college,
Yeah. So
or call it the first month of college.
welcome to the back to the show, Eric. And let's talk. We'll get to the pardon, but let's set the predicate. Tell us a little bit about Hunter Biden when you knew him as a young man.
Hunter was always Bo's younger brother. So Bo would bring him around, and Hunter was almost the heavy for Bo. Bo was going to be in the background, being cool, not drinking, but being funny, kind of leading from the back. Hunter was his front man. He was out in the front. I remember the first time I met Hunter, he came to visit us. We were freshmen. It was probably a month into school. He came with a couple friends. We were hanging out in Bo's room. Hunter decided he was going to walk around. He was wearing cowboy boots. So walking around the quad at Penn in cowboy boots is a noisy affair. So he was click clacking his way around. He had a couple guys on him. And this is right around the time of the Neil Kinnock affair, where his father had either previously or recently gotten out of the race or was in the middle of deciding whether to get out of the race and
Well, let me
had
let me
got
interrupt you. Let me give a small bit of background for our listeners. So, Joe Biden, the first time he ran for president in the 1987-1988 cycle, had this great stump speech, but he appropriated details from the life of Neil Kinnock, and some of it was like word for word. And he was actually forced out of the race. Although today that seems such a venial sin compared to politics now. But go ahead, Eric.
so meanwhile we're hanging out, probably drinking a few beers. An hour later, Hunter comes back, and apparently he knocked out a kid on the lacrosse team because he gave him a hard time about his dad.
Oh boy.
So Hunter cold cocked him, put him on the ground, and kept click clacking his way back. And that's what we heard when he got back. So
All right. So
that
you're
was
listening.
that was my first meeting with Hunter. But Hunter is a complex guy. At the end of the day, Hunter would tell you this: Hunter is an addict.
All right, well, that's okay. But the part of the salient part of the story now, I'm talking to Eric Spitz, um, who knew Hunter Biden in their college days at the University of Pennsylvania. The salient part of the story now is the Biden boys were always looking out for one another, weren't they? Um,
They absolutely were.
so
And
Hunter Colcock's a kid who criticized his dad all these years later. Uh, what are we talking about? Yeah, 35 years later, Joe Biden gets in trouble, or not really in trouble, but he's raised eyebrows and caused. It's the story of the week. He's pardoned his son, this unconditional pardon on these criminal charges that relate to a gun charge that a lot of prosecutors I've talked to thought was trivial and might not have been brought except for the visibility of the defendant, and tax evasion charges and influence peddling charges that are more serious. But anyway, Hunter doesn't have to go to prison for any of them. What was your reaction, Eric, when you first heard that?
I thought it was a good thing. I think we live in a transactional world these days. And I can imagine thinking about it in January of next year as if Joe Biden hadn't pardoned his son, and people would be laughing at him. They would be saying, "Why didn't you do that? It was so obvious. It was such an easy decision." In the same way that when people say, "Well, why did he have to go all the way?" He had to go all the way with full immunity because that's the way you do a deal. You got to do the deal correctly, or people are going to say you did a dumb deal.
Well,
This is a transactional universe.
yeah, he could have commuted the sentence. He could have said no time, but this was a cleaner break. I think, look, you know this, you're not naive. The point why Biden's taken so much crap over it is he repeatedly said he wouldn't do this. And it made him look either cynical or like he was planning to have Kamala Harris do it. Um, his story is it was a convoluted statement the press White House put out yesterday, he sort of went full Trump, and Eric Adams did, decrying what he all but, he didn't use the phrase deep state, but he kind of got out over his skis on that. Um, but, but he, but he also said something that I understood, which is he's looked what Donald Trump is not coming into office apparently as a conciliatory figure. He is not saying the Democrats got way out on this lawfare, and let's restore, let's show them how you're really supposed to do it. Let's show more grace than the Democrats. Let's put an end to these kind of no. He's saying it's time to pay the piper. It's time for retribution. And then he brings in Kash
Hello,
Patel.
Cash Patel.
Yeah, who's talking about, investigating FBI lawyers. So
Right.
then you think, well, okay, my kid's going to do hard time. So I get that. But I have to tell you what I thought, and I want to know what you think about this. I just thought he shouldn't have gotten into that. And he shouldn't have implied that he shouldn't have left the inference that he did, that he was hoping Kamala Harris would do this. What he should have said was something like, and I imagine this is also the truth. Look, I spent Thanksgiving with my son. Anybody would do what I'm about to do. I shouldn't have never said I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't lying then. But I have changed my mind. I spent time with him, and I can't bear the thought of my son in prison. So forgive me, but that's what I'm going to do. I think that would have been a lot more. I think the American people would respond to that better than they're responding to it now. What's your thought?
I agree.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue with that. I think that he has been a bit ham-handed for a while, in the sense that this is just a ham-handed way of handling something that could have been handled with some planning and forethought. And you know that I have an opinion about the way he handled the whole Kamala Harris transition, or the non-transition, early enough.
Well, now Eric's getting into an area we don't usually get into, but I'll tell our listeners. He's writing a piece about the Joe Biden legacy and how it was harmed by this pick, 4 years ago of a vice president. We'll get into that, Eric. That piece is still being written. When it's published, I'd like you to come up back on the radio and talk about it. I wanted to ask you about something else though, because I have a thought about it, but I want to get yours, which is this idea. Jerry Baker, Wall Street Journal, has this column. He ends it by saying, we fought a war, a revolution against the British, against the divine right of kings, and that this pardon power, this absolute power, pardon power, really comes from British common law, and it's something the founders did on purpose. He's critical of it. Of the presidential power, pardon itself, the power to pardon? What is your view of that, Eric?
I read the piece. I thought it was my opinion of that idea is that it is what the founders wanted. They did it for a reason. And the reason was, there are some things, and I think this fits perfectly into the few things where the guy was persecuted because he was the son of the president. You can talk about the stuff that he did with Burisma, and see if that had much weight, but the rest of the stuff was lesser than would get normally punished, and would get normally made a deal out of, would have gotten pled out in court. And therefore, it makes sense for the president to have an aura of mercy around him, and mercy around the people who he brought into the arena, as it
Well,
were.
well, I agree with that completely. The founders, I wrote about this extensively for National Journal back when Bill Clinton was really abusing the power. On his way out of office, he pardoned all these people, including Mark Rich, who was a financier, a fugitive. He'd never even answered the
Right.
charges, and he'd taken his money abroad. He was giving money to the Clinton Foundation. It was an unseemly pardon, and there were others like it. Pardon his brother. I don't think the founders had that in mind. So you can argue that this power has been abused in the modern time. But I'm with you, Eric. The founders, it was the one thing that kings did that the founders admired, which was show mercy. And I think they didn't want the president, and they all knew it was going to be George Washington. They didn't want the American president to have less of an ability to exert mercy than the English king. It was the one thing, this is the one power of the crown that they thought, all right, we'll keep that. And we'll have and I think we should keep it. And my own, it's just an opinion here. That's all it is. But I don't think these abuses that we've seen in modern times should change our desire to keep this important power. It's in the Constitution. It would take a constitutional amendment to change it. Um, and I'll remind you of this one thing, and you know about it, and I'd like your thoughts on it. Liberals and Democrats thought that Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon was an abuse of this power, and it probably cost Jerry Ford his election against Jimmy Carter. But people have come around. Everybody from Bob Woodward, who covered that story, to liberal legal scholars have revisited that in the last couple of decades, and the consensus now is that Jerry Ford did a noble thing. And so I think that's the other thing about this pardon. We're in the moment now. We've just come through a bruising campaign. I wonder if people in the future will look at this in a more benign light.
I I think it'll be a blip, to be honest. I think that the entire Joe Biden presidency will be a blip.
Hmm. Well, that's uh that's the conversation we're going to have next time when you complete that story you're writing for me. You've been listening to Eric Spitz, former owner of the Orange County Register and a childhood college friend of Hunter Biden's and a friend of the show and contributor to Real Clear Politics. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of RCP, and we'll be right back. Andy Walrus got a good interview, so don't go away.